and I'm here to share a little bit more about what we're doing and hopefully make this a really productive breakout session for you all. So before I get started, I'd love to map out a few of the questions and areas that you'd like me to focus on so I can make sure that this is a really helpful talk for you all. So does anyone have any idea of what they'd like to cover? What they'd like me to touch on?
How things are going at Clara.
All right. So progress. What else?
Challenges related to scale.
Scale up. Perfect. Yeah, perfect. Regulatory. What else?
Sourcing of ingredients.
Okay.
Price point.
Price point.
It's been surprising.
Surprising.
Manufacturing, will you do it in-house or contract?
Yeah. Scalability.
What are you going to talk about in hour 6?
Huh? Yeah, I think that this should about cover it. Anything else? Does everyone, I know this is a very well-informed audience given the questions that you all are asking. Does everyone know what we're doing, or would it be helpful to also provide an overview of what we do? Okay, great. All right. Well, hi everyone. I'm Arturo again. I'm the founder and CEO of Clara Foods. We're a food biotech company. And we brew proteins. So at the most fundamental level, we design yeast to actually be able to produce proteins very efficiently. One of the things that we've seen, especially with in the food industry, is that as companies look to become more and more sustainable, is that there are ingredients that just don't cut it. And what we want to do is, as plant ingredients become much more and more dominant, identify the gaps. What are the things that plant proteins cannot do? What are the gaps in terms of flavor, texture, mouthfeel, functionality, where there's a delta between plant proteins and animal proteins? And instead, actually, you cover that delta by making the animal proteins themselves. So if you all look on your phones, I actually uploaded a deck. It's a high-level deck of what we do. On the Attentify app, if you click on My Talk, I actually included a high-level slide deck that gives an overview of the company and our approach. But at the most fundamental level, we make protein. That's all that we really focus on. And what that means is, when it comes to the portfolio of products, we began looking at egg proteins because eggs are incredibly functional. They're some of the most nutritional proteins on the planet, as well as some of the most functional. And we felt that the egg white was sort of this perfect way to build this protein production platform of how do you make proteins from microorganisms like yeast that perform, taste, and function just like animal proteins. And so we looked at the egg white because it's 90% water, 10% protein. You look at every other animal product, and there's a bunch of fats, proteins, carbs, water, the texture, the flavor profile. There's a lot of complexity to them. And what we wanted to do is actually focus on one particular problem, which was the protein side. Because we felt that if we can solve that, we can actually make a big impact in the food industry that way. And so we stumbled upon a product that was a multi-billion-dollar ingredient, but at its core was a pretty simple product. However, like every product out there, That 10% is not just one protein. It's not just egg white protein, albumin. Depending on how you count, you can find over 50 different proteins in the egg white. And they all do different things. They all foam differently, bind differently, gel differently, have their own unique amino acid profile, have their own unique bioavailability, and have their own taste and color. And all of them together give you this incredible product that is used across so many different, products across baked goods, veggie meats, and omelets, protein powders, etc. And what we decided to do is actually go to this at the molecular level and figure out what are the proteins that are the most important to get you this product that cooks, looks, and tastes like that. So instead of making 50 proteins, we said, how do we narrow it down as simply as possible and get to the most critical proteins and make that product what it is? And actually use those learnings to try and inform our product strategy. So out of the 50 proteins, we spent our first year basically going through systematically studying these proteins, and we identified a handful of proteins that together, the 10% of those proteins together, actually combined in different proportions can make an egg white that looks, cooks, and tastes just like any other egg white. The one that you see in the deck, we formulated with just a handful of proteins that together do everything an egg white is supposed to do, at least from a consumer standpoint. And so what we decided to do is take it a step further and said, well, once we close our Series A, let's actually start optimizing the technology. Let's prove out that you can make protein efficiently enough using fermentation. So in the food tech landscape, you see a whole spectrum of products, right, that range from the plant-based approach all the way to the kind of cell culture approach. The one that I fell in love with and the one that we're using is fermentation, because it's a technology that we know has been scaled before. Companies like Novozymes, DuPont, Cargill, ADM, Genentech have been using it for decades and already have all the scale necessary, and that technology can actually get you to the same product fungibility of a clean meat product. But unlike clean meat products are based off of cells, eggs are just protein, right? Egg whites are just protein. And so we can use this technology to make the same exact proteins and get to the same product that a chicken would make, but made in a way that we also feel very excited about the scalability of it. And so that's why I chose this particular technology. So in terms of progress, we have now proven that you can make animal protein efficiently enough to compete at scale with animal protein produced from a microorganism that had never really been done before. And so now it's about then actually refining the portfolio of products. So this handful of proteins together make an egg white, but actually individually have very unique properties. And so some of them, essentially are natural antimicrobials that kill bacteria. Some of them foam incredibly well and can actually start replacing eggs in a few applications. And others have an incredible taste that can make them very, strong replacements for whey in protein beverages. And so for us, it's thinking about how do we start actually going to our MVPs, if you will. So we don't have to wait 5 years to commercialize. We can actually start making revenue right off the bat. And so that's how we're now stratifying our company. And so we have a portfolio of different animal proteins that operate in very different segments and at very different price points and at very different scales. And so for us, it makes sense to have an impact in the food industry is to have a portfolio of products that can tackle different markets, can do different things, but ultimately are fed from the same technology platform that we're building. Whether it's a pig protein, a cow protein, an egg protein, the technology that we have really worked to build on designing yeast to be very good at making protein can be used across multiple different kinds of proteins. And so now we're working with our partners and investors to really start refining that strategy and those different products and seeing which ones actually have the most attractive market opportunities for us to then start deploying. So I hope I answered these. In terms of regulatory, so the beauty of what we do, anyway, any questions so far? Please feel free to ask them along the way as well, okay? Is this helpful? Yeah? Okay.
So basically, you're going to be designing proteins that work in different applications.
Exactly, yeah. Is we decided as a company, it doesn't make sense to be a one-trick pony and make this one product that is incredibly complex and a pure commodity and live or die by one single product, when the technology can actually be used for so much more. And so we're really focusing on developing a true protein platform that then we can use to actually solve problems for big and small food companies, where they say, hey, you know what, I've been trying to make a protein beverage, and the best one is whey. Pea protein and soy protein suck when it comes to making a protein drink, right? And so when it comes to winning consumers over, how can you do that when you don't have ingredients that actually work and deliver that functionality and those properties? And so for us, we felt that there was a much, really a much bigger calling for us and a much smarter way to build a real business. So that's what got us really excited. And especially on the regulatory front, so we actually engaged the FDA probably like 2 weeks in after we founded the company back in March of 2015, so essentially 4 years ago, talking about labeling and the pathway to getting to market. Fortunately for proteins, it's a very clear path, which is what the FDA calls the GRAS process, that generally recognized as safe. And so that's been used to actually make and approve rennet. It was actually the first animal protein made using fermentation for food. And it's actually used in cheese making right now. So around 80 to 90% of cheese produced in the US right now uses a rennet that no longer comes from baby cows, it comes from a microbe. So we want to use the same, huh? What?
You are covered under that.
Yeah. So we developed the dossiers, we have consultants that we work with. There are a lot of GRAS consultants out there that help companies with that have done this a million times. So we have a few consultants that we work with to build the dossier and mainly to prove out that the yeast that we're working with is safe, has already been used to make other food products, and the proteins we're making are egg proteins. I know there are a lot of vegans out here, so I won't ask the question here, but if you had an egg for breakfast this morning or at some point this week, you ate every single protein that we're making. So that we know that the proteins are safe. We know that they've been around for millennia.
Did you get the letter of non-objection from the FDA?
No, we haven't submitted it yet. So we have been in R&D for the last 4 years. We will be going to market in the next 12 months.
So is this an animal or a plant?
Animal protein. Yeah, so we make, huh? Yeah, exactly. So on the label, it could read as egg protein, parentheses, made from yeast, because that's exactly what it is. And so for the FDA, it's, we're being real, we're being truthful to the consumer, but we're also understanding that consumers need to understand what it means, but we need to use language that people understand. Yeah.
You don't have to say, but do you know what the product's going to be? Market in 12 months?
So it's a very obscure ingredient that's used in like the wine and cheese industry. Huh? It's an egg protein.
Is that the obscure ingredient you're talking about?
Yes. So that's part of our IP is actually essentially formulating our different products with different proteins, and then with individual proteins finding new applications for them. So in terms of determining which proteins we're using, a lot of that is what we protect as our IP. In terms of sourcing ingredients, so the actual way of making it is we essentially engineer yeast. Instead of making random yeast protein, which what it normally does, or it starts making alcohol to make beer and wine, and our yeast is designed to convert sugar into protein. So when it comes to sourcing, we need to obviously keep costs in mind, but also be very thoughtful about where the ingredients come from. And from our perspective, to have the biggest impact, we need to be using feedstock and raw materials that are very accessible to to any company. And so fortunately, the sugar industry is not doing too well, and so prices are relatively low, and that makes it very attractive for a lot of companies to use a raw material that, although objectively may not be super sustainable, when it comes to using 10 times less sugar than chicken would be using to make that same exact protein, in terms of grain calories, it's a very, very big difference. And so for us, that's a really important point. In terms of price point, as I mentioned, we will have two different price points when we go to market. One will be pre-scale, and one will be post-scale. So pre-scale is when we actually start renting out fermenters from companies. So there are companies that actually are built to rent out fermenters and do toll manufacturing, what we call contract manufacturers. And they obviously, as a business, have to make quite a bit of a markup. And so they charge a premium to companies like us, and we have to absorb that in some shape or form. And so we are looking at being more expensive with some of the egg replacer products right off the get-go, but being at parity with some of these higher value specialty proteins that are also still extracted from animals today. The second price point is once we scale. And what does that mean, right, when we scale? So we put our yeast in fermenters that companies already have. So if you think about Cargill, ADM, DuPont, and Novozymes, what they do is they have these massive fermenters, they put a microbe in there and they make a protein. And you feed the microbe sugar and it produces that protein at various points of unit economics, but all of those resources have already been essentially depreciated. So when it comes to scale up, the process looks like for us, we have in our labs large enough fermenters that we know if it works here, we can scale it up to, we have a 40-liter fermenter in our labs. We scale that up to 1,000 at a toll manufacturer, and then from there, we can very easily predict how well it will perform at the 200,000 liter scale. And if you think about how much protein, what that means is that for example, a yeast making around 30 to 50 grams per liter in a fermenter can then translate into, if you're doing 50 batches, for example, you can kind of, as a rule of thumb, do $1 per liter per year. It's kind of a rule of thumb that you could use, just how much protein. And so what that translates to in terms of price points is that you can get to price points with fermentation at around $10 a kilo with reasonable yields that you're getting, which operates then very well in the commodity protein market. At scale, the price point obviously then probably doubles or triples depending on if you're renting out fermenters. So I hope I covered these. And then our goal at scale is to either buy up an old biofuels facility. A lot of companies actually built out massive fermenters back in the 2000s, where they built out large fermentation capacity, and a lot of them are sitting idle right now. And so a lot of companies now are beginning to just buy up these facilities, or what we can also do is say, look, ADM, Cargill, Novozymes, you may have some extra fermenters laying around. Why don't we just partner with you since you're a food company and actually start using up your excess fermenters that you're working with. And either of those options will give us that scale that we need in terms of manufacturing standpoint. In terms of the most surprising piece, I'm a first-time founder, and I had never really appreciated how unimportant the idea was. And I know it sounds crazy, but there are so many ideas out there. And I thought we had a fantastic idea, and because we had a great idea, we could build this massive business. And that was it, right? You start with a great idea and you build this great business. But along the way, what I did not appreciate was how much people play in making those organizations happen, and how much you have to make sure you have people who are incredibly motivated by the work that we're doing. And so we're actively hiring a lot of people. This is a shameless plug, but we need people that truly believe in the mission and the why of what we're doing, because it's hard. It's not easy, and there's a lot that we still need to do, and we need people who truly believe in the work that we're doing and want to be a part of our journey. So that's one thing that has been very surprising, and I really hope that some of you in the audience would be interested in working with us at some point.
What kind of positions are you looking for?
So our team is built out in molecular biologists, chemical engineers that do the scale up, and then food scientists and business development people. So if you have any of those expertise, we're hiring across all of those teams. Yes?
Comment on the shelf life and whether refrigeration is necessary.
Yeah, so that's the beauty of fermentation, is that we can actually make it powder the way that like a lot of companies, if they're big enough, they'll say just ship it in powder because it's 90% water, 10% protein, or ship it in liquid because we're a smaller bakery. And so with fermentation, we can either concentrate it into a liquid or actually spray dry it and ship it as a powder. And the shelf life, we're expecting to be, we haven't done the full shelf life studies, but we're expecting to be at parity or exceed it because our process is much more sterile.
Usually when you heat egg white protein
Yeah.
gels, how do you handle that? Do you gel it? To me, it would gel in the spray, right?
Yeah. Yeah. There are some technologies that allow you, depending on how long it's actually being spray dried. There are some technologies that allow you to not have to use a warm spray dryer and actually use a cool one, and that's one solution. The other one is some proteins actually. The egg has so many different kinds of proteins. Some of them have much higher, gelling points, if you will, and those can work very easily in the spray dryer system. Yeah. Yeah.
When you say you're building a platform that makes it easy to scale different proteins, because I feel like with each different strain that you use, each different protein of interest, the performance just varies so much that in the media that you would re-optimize, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, that's absolutely true, and it does vary from protein to protein. But what we have also found, and we actually tested a lot different egg proteins, different chicken egg proteins, different proteins that the egg proteins that come from a completely different kinds of species, and we've tested mammalian proteins as well. And what we have seen across all of these proteins is that there's around 70% that actually can translate from protein to protein. And there's that 30 that then you have to tweak depending on what kind of protein it is. So, and not all proteins work in our platform, and what we've developed is a really robust process to say, yes, we can make it, no, we can't. And know that pretty quickly, so we don't have to invest so many resources in doing that. But it's obviously been a learning process for us, and that's definitely been a challenge, because as a startup, you have very limited bandwidth, and so we can't really, and you need focus, right? So we couldn't afford to work on a lot of different kinds of proteins, but now we really feel like we have a much stronger grasp on the protein platform that we're building, and we feel really good about that. Huh?
Which one don't work?
So there are some proteins that carry other minerals. And so some of them, or some of them have incredibly positive or negative charges. Some of them are massive that a yeast system just cannot produce. So there is a good rule of thumb to say, all right, if it's this kind of protein, or this kind of protein, our platform will have a hard time producing it efficiently enough. We can probably produce any kind of protein, but when we say whether or not it can produce it, it's whether we can produce it efficiently enough. Because we're a food company, right? We need to be able to sell volumes and at low enough cost points. Yeah.
Have you done any work, or are you interested in making shells?
Yeah, so that's I can't really speak much about that. But yeah, part of it is we didn't think about that initially because it seems if the organism doesn't naturally make it, it seems kind of wasteful, right? And it would mainly be from a consumer standpoint that it's just easy for them to adopt it if it's a one-to-one replacement, and so that's why we would potentially do it. For the companies that we work with, we're mainly set up to be a B2B company at scale, and so for a lot of these companies, they'd rather get the pallets. But great question. Yeah.
Regarding consumer acceptance, do you
Yeah, so we actually, that was a really great, one of our first questions from our first group of investors, and it's still, we still get that same question in every round. But our proteins are not, so the yeast is GMO, the protein is not. Similar to the heme in the Impossible Foods burger. And so the proteins are completely GMO free, there's no DNA in there, they're just amino acids, right? So from that perspective, they're not GMO. From a vegan standpoint, that's the conundrum because we're making real egg proteins. If you're allergic to eggs, you will probably be allergic to our products. We're doing more research to actually discriminate which proteins are actually the least allergenic, but for simplicity's sake, ours are identical to those proteins, and so perform very similarly. But I actually worked with the largest vegan and animal welfare organizations on the planet to talk to them about what we were doing, and they actually kind of came in and were very supportive and to certify our products as vegan, and that they that they're supportive of what we're doing, and so that was very, very helpful for us to answer. No, it wouldn't have a GMO label. It would be GMO free, but not the sticker, the non-GMO project verification, just like cheese. A lot of cheese doesn't even have that sticker because they use the rennet. And so we've seen, these technologies have been adopted across, in the entire cheese industry, so we feel really good about that. But for some consumers, it may not work. Yeah. Anything else? Was that helpful? Yeah. Thank you. Oh, also, if you guys have any questions, my email is arturo@clarafoods.com. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm accessible, so if you all want to bat around ideas, if you have any other questions, if you want to invest or partner or anything, I would love to talk to you guys. Thank you.
Congratulations.
Yeah.